All right, welcome everybody to the Wednesday, August 9th, 2017 meeting of Kubernetes SIG Service Catalog. Here is where I turn the meeting over to Aaron to decide what happens next, apparently. I think we're doing something different this time. Anyway, Aaron, now you talk.
Thanks, Paul. Not doing anything different. We're going to continue to do the speaker queue. Got my high-tech equipment as always. I want to introduce everyone to George. George is from Heptio, and he's a part of the community team in Kubernetes Core. He has very generously agreed to help us take really good detailed notes for today, and hoping that everyone acts on their best behavior so that he'll stay with us. So we're going to do the same thing. We've got our notes here. I just pasted into the docs. If you've got something you want to add to the conversation, just put a hand up in the chat like so. Plus hand. And with that, George, would you mind sharing your screen as you type notes in? Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, it worked this time.
Cool. All right. So with that, let's start with you, Niall. I moved two of your issues to the top of today's meeting because we didn't get to them the previous two meetings. So let's start with instance parameters, issue number 1075.
So yeah, we have discussed this issue many times before. Now it's turned into the minimal improvement of the existing one. So we currently have inline JSON support, and we needed a support for secrets. And I just added parameters from section as a union type, which we can extend in the future. And for now, it supports only one source, which is a secret key reference to a JSON blob. And I think it should be good enough for most people who were requesting this feature, for now at least. And I have also implemented this feature already. So there is another PR implementing it. There are some minor comments from Paul, I think. I will address them probably today. And if there are any objections or requirements for making implementing differently or blockers, please take a look. And this design proposal, I think, should be merged, but because it was written as a documentation, not as a proposal, I think Paul suggested to merge it after we merge the code implementing it.
Cool. Paul, you are up next in the speaker queue, so go ahead and take the floor.
So I think that we have, I thought that we already had consensus on this. I think your code PR is ready to merge modulo. There's a couple nits about documentation in the Go doc for the types. I suggest that we go ahead and merge this once you've addressed those, and then merge the doc, and I think that we should be done for beta with this.
Okay, I just haven't seen any more new comments or LGTMs or anything. That's why I'm just.
Yeah, I've left some comments on your code pull requests. I think I left a comment, and maybe you just missed it, that said I think the doc is good. Let's merge it after the code merges, since it was written as doc rather than like a proposal. So I think we talked through this already.
All right, Doug's got a hand up, so Doug, go ahead and take the floor.
Yeah, so there's a really bad echo. My only request is that we wait until the end of the day or tomorrow or so, and then once it reaches the two LGTMs, we're going to merge it. The only reason I'm asking for a little bit of delay is because I've been meaning to review the code. I just haven't had a chance to do it yet. So I'd like at least an opportunity to have one more day to get a chance to review it before we merge it. That's my only ask.
Okay.
Just to be clear, we're talking about 1075 still, right? I just want to make sure the notes match.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
and if anytime I write something wrong down, just go and correct it or...
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, well, the issue is 1075. I think the code is in 1079. But yeah, same thing basically.
We're on that bullet point.
Yeah.
George. So I have heard that we're good with the code. Doug has asked that we wait at least till the end of today. So in order to come to consensus, a final decision on this, does anyone have any objections to waiting till the end of today before we merge 1079?
Assuming it gets the 2 LGTMs, that's fine.
Yeah, it needs reviews.
I don't want to merge without any LGTMs, which is what it is in right now. So
Okay. I was unaware. So everybody please go and review 1079. There's a link in the doc. We are aiming to, Doug, for you to go look at that, do your review by the end of today, please. I will do the same thing. And Paul, you've got your hand up, so go ahead and take the floor. You are muted, Paul.
I don't think everybody needs to review it. I think I've already reviewed it in depth. One other reviewer should be totally sufficient. This has been in flight for quite a while, so I would have a strong preference to get it merged. And if there are like nits or something that aren't major issues, to get this in so that we could get it into a release as soon as possible.
Okay. Do we have any other comments on this item before we move on? Going once. All right. So with that, let's move on. Niall, you're up next as well for 1109, the Binding Credentials API. So please go ahead and take the floor.
Yeah, I have raised this issue just a couple of days ago, and it is inspired by the previous PR we have just discussed. So with the current implementation, the way binding credentials are stored is split, like each key in credentials object is split into a separate JSON object, and it's stored as a key value pair in secret. But previously, I think Sam has mentioned that there is a limitation of this approach. It was for instance parameters, but it's the same for bindings, that secret key has more limitations on the format than JSON property. For example, it doesn't allow slashes, $, or some other characters which are valid for JSON, which means that if any of these characters are returned as part of the credentials object response from broker, we will fail to store it. This is one problem, and the other is that, like, if someone wants to process the credentials as a blob and like as a single entity, it will have to combine it back based on the key value pairs in secret, which is also, I'm not sure if it's the best user experience. So my question was mostly about, like, it seems that current implementation is nice when credentials objects is returned as map string as a flat map, and it's easy to inject separate values from credentials as environment variables. So you can only inject the ones you need, and you don't need to transform this secrets into a different secrets to inject them. But I think that we should consider making it a union type or something and allow for different ways of storing credentials object. For example, we can have a union type which will have a secret ref working exactly as it works now, and secret key ref which will store it as a blob, and potentially maybe, I don't know, we can have some other ways as well. And also I think that if we do implement it this way, it could even make more sense for having resources like pod preset binding, which were like proposed by Paul before. So, for example, if you have a blob and you want to, and the credentials object is not returned as a flat map or but some complex object, you need to transform this data into a format which will be injectable into the pod. So you can have some controller which will take this secret with the blob as an input and produce a set of environment variables which you can inject, something like that.
Okay. Paul, you've got your hand up, so go ahead, take the floor, please.
So now this is actually a duplicate of this issue 1045 that says basically the exact same thing. So I think we ought to close this one so we don't have two hanging around.
Okay.
I would be fully supportive of this. I think it's a valid use case. Probably the immediate thing that we would use this for would be if people wanted to start after the initial beta release working on a VCAP services binding that would be on top of the open service broker binding. I think that would be very useful for this. I don't think I would bin this in terms of the initial beta as a nice to have. If somebody wants to staff it and implement it, I think that would be fine. I would prefer not to have additional design discussions on it until we talk through some of the more pressing things, unless everybody thinks that what Niall's already proposed for a union type sounds good, in which case, if we can get a quick consensus, I think that would be great. Sorry, distraction. I think there are other design things that probably are higher priority to talk through first, unless we think it's going to be a very quick consensus.
Okay, Doug, you're up next. Go ahead.
From looking at both of the issues, it seems like either one of those would cause a change to our model. And so from that perspective, I think we should at least have the design discussion before beta. Relative to the two proposals, now I think the proposal you have in, what is it, 1109, seems fairly straightforward. My only comment on that is I actually would like to see both in there, because if I understood what you were saying correctly, is if there are any property names that cannot be mapped to secret names because of a character mismatch, that they'll basically be skipped. So I would like the ability to say, stick the entire blob in there for those cases where I know there are going to be things that won't come back as secret keys, but I still need access to them. But for other things, I'm okay with going to the secret key to get them. So that's why I do see a need for both. But I think between the two, I think what you're proposing in 1109 seems fairly straightforward, and we could probably come to a fairly quick resolution, I think.
Okay. I mean, it's not.
You're up, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's not compatible with the union type definition of union type, but if we go for it, sure. Also, I was going to suggest to Paul that I agree that support for the blob is not required for beta, but if we are going to break the API, we should do it before beta, I guess.
Okay, Paul, you're up. Go ahead.
Okay, so it sounds like we're pretty close together on this. As far as Doug's desire for both, I think that can just be another union type option. So we could have the flat map type style, what we do today, as one option. We could have shove everything into a single secret key as an option, and then we can have another option for both. And I think those would be forward compatible, and it does sound like we're pretty close to consensus. So I wonder, do we have anybody that does not think that we should just do a union type, and that somebody can come along and implement these additional methods as they want to do them, whether that's before or after beta? The beta release.
All right, Doug, you got a hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, between the two proposals, I prefer the one in 1109. I find the union type to be kind of clumsy because it requires wrappers around everything. I think the way Null has laid it out there, it's very straightforward and easy for someone to get their head around. And it allows for one or both without having to create yet another type of thing, meaning another union type. I think 1109's simplicity is overwhelming to me.
All right, go ahead, Paul.
I think that we should recognize that this is a situation where we have tended to rat hole. So why don't we go over specifically what is proposed in 1109? It sounds like we're going to try to get design consensus on this now, and that's fine. Let's look at 1109 so we can discuss it together.
All right. So, George, would you mind keeping the notes open? And everyone else, I'm going to have everyone just open up 1109. And Paul, I'm not quite sure what exactly you want to focus on in that issue and what the goal is here. So maybe you could fill in those gaps.
I only want us to just look at this now. The issue that I opened was not intended to actually be a proposal for API. It was only an attempt to illustrate the use case. Let's all look at what Null has proposed here.
If you look at the bottom of the very first comment at 1109, I think that's the actual proposal right now.
So I'm going to put a cap of 3 minutes on this, and if we can't have a consensus, then I'll move it.
Can we do 5? 3 seems a little arbitrary.
I'm going to put a cap. I'll give you 4. We need to move on is the only reason I'm saying this.
All right.
I do not object to my proposal.
Shocking.
So what's going to happen now, Paul? Niall, do you want to explain the proposal? I'm not really still sure what we're
Yeah,
I'm happy to share my screen. I will share my screen, and we can just look at this quick. And I think that we're very close together. So hopefully people can look at this. Nal, you can explain the proposal, and let's just get a consensus on it and move on. Does that work for everybody? Or I don't even have to share my screen. George has already done it, but then he second-guessed himself.
There you go. All right.
So Nal, why don't you explain the proposal, and let's just get a quick consensus on this.
Okay, so at the top we see that the way it's currently implemented. So at the top level of specification, we have a single secret name field. And the problem with it, I have listed like 3 issues, which I have already mentioned already, that like secret key has its limitation. Also, when we split the values from credentials, if it contains some specific types other than objects like JSON array or integer or something else, we can't tell what was the value type. It could be a problem. And as I said before, that like if credential is not a flat map string, but something more complicated, it doesn't help you to inject environment variables. You'll have to manipulate this data anyway, and it's easier to manipulate the raw JSON blob rather than trying to merge it back from separate key value pairs. So at the top level spec, I propose to have a credentials field, which represents a reference to a union type. And like my proposal says that either only one of the fields in credentials object can be set at a time. So it could be either the same approach as we currently have for secret name, but it will be a separate field called secret with a secret ref containing the name of the secret to put the value in. And the separate one is secret key ref, which will be used for storing the entire JSON blob. And potentially we can have other fields as well at this level. That's it.
George, do you mind scrolling down a little bit so everyone can see that portion? Yeah, I think that's good, right, Niall?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Paul, so Niall, was that everything you needed to say to summarize?
Yep.
All right. So Paul, you've got a hand up, so go ahead.
So from what I've heard so far, I think that we have a consensus on most of this. And the consensus is that we should support these methods individually. I do not think that we have a consensus on how to support both of them. And so here's what I suggest. I suggest that we adopt what NAL has proposed in 1109, and both of the flavors that I think we have different, my read is that we have different, two different flavors of how we would support both. I think that we should split that into a separate issue and discuss it separately. And let's get consensus on this. Both of the flavors that we've discussed are forward compatible with this API. So that would be my suggestion. That lets us focus the discussion on what we do agree on, and we can move on. And Doug, I think you're primarily interested in supporting both simultaneously. My suggestion would be, why don't you open an issue for the best way to do that, and we can talk about that as a separate discussion. EOF.
Okay. So Doug, first of all, note that I've given well over 3 minutes, almost double the time. You're welcome. Second of all, you're up for taking the floor. Go ahead.
A whole 3 minutes. So now a couple questions for you. The credentials property name, I'm curious whether that wrapper is actually necessary.
I think it's just more explicit of what this secret means, because for bindings, for example, when you say secret name, it doesn't suggest you what is this secret name. Is it output? Is it input? Is it for credentials or something else? It's just secret. While if you put it inside credentials, it's clear that you say that I want to put the secret credentials into this.
Okay, so it's there for clarity. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The other question I have is, in your comment you say, or store the raw credentials. It's not clear to me whether you allow secret ref and secret key ref to both be specified, or it's a one or the other kind of thing.
Okay, so my initial proposal was to not have both things specified, but I think if we want to support multiple things, by looking at the Kubernetes APIs and the way we have implemented instance parameters, I would suggest that we still don't support setting multiple values at a time, but we can provide a list of outputs, if it makes sense. So you could just say, put it into secret and into this secret and into this secret key ref, and like how many times you want to put the result into, it's up to you. The only downside of this I see is that what if we fail one of the outputs, it will leave the result in the intermediate state, and it's more complicated than just storing it once.
Right, so because I was wondering whether there's an issue with allowing both of them to be there. I'm not asking for a list, just allow one or both or either one. I'm wondering if there's an issue with just saying you can specify both if you wanted to, or just one.
I don't think there is an issue which requires both things to specify.
Okay, because that'd be my slight preferred tweak to the proposal then. But okay, I think I'm done.
Okay, Niall, you had a hand up next, so go ahead.
So that's exactly, yeah, I have already said that if we are going to support multiple things, that I would go for a list, not for a union type, which is not a union type, but I don't know how to name it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Paul, you got a hand up. Go ahead.
So if we want to do a list, which I think is getting into extremely complicated territory without a specific use case, we can implement that list scheme as another portion of the union type. And it will indicate very clearly what the intent is. Like I have said, I think the name of the game here is we have a consensus on 95% of this. Let's try to nail that down and get it into a state where somebody can go and implement it, and we can whittle on the last 5% in another discussion. Would be my preference.
Okay. I put my hand up to try to get some consensus specific here. Paul, I've heard you propose a 95% solution. I wonder if anybody disagrees with that solution to gain consensus at this point so we can move forward. Going once. Okay. So Paul, can you write in the notes here and in the appropriate GitHub issue exactly what this consensus is?
Yes, I will do that. Would you like me to do that now?
Yes, please.
Okay.
At least in the notes.
Yeah, let me get to this place in the notes. So, consensus. We will adopt Null's proposal in 1107, close 1045.
It's 1109.
Sorry, my bad. It's only on here about 10 times in front of my face, so, you know, understandable that I would miss it. And have a follow-on discussion about supporting other modes. And I think Doug has an action item to open an issue for semantics of supporting both modes simultaneously. Accurate?
Any disagreement here? Please put your hand up if you have some. Going once. Okay. Let's move on then. Morgan, you have an issue number 1047 here. I know that there are some responses already, so people who want to respond, please put your hand up while Morgan does an overview.
No, there was an issue with the way we were creating a pod preset, I guess, and that there's an annotation that gets created that was too long and doesn't validate downstream, so we get a failure. But if it's just something to pay attention to when we bring back pod presets or whatever. So, you know, as it is, I guess there's probably not anything to do, since I just wanted to make sure that pod presets were going away. This has been on here for, I guess, a week or two, and you know, during that time we've kind of made this pod preset going away decision. So, but it'll reappear if depending on how we do the validation in the future.
Okay. Paul, you're up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Morgan has said everything that I was going to say. I went ahead and closed this one since we don't have pod preset integration anymore at this point.
Okay. Niall, you're up next. Go ahead.
So my question was whether this annotation blob is specific to pod preset, or do we have other places where we potentially can have the same problem?
I think
I don't know
you
where
have
the
this problem
annotation
on.
from in the first place.
Let's
so.
hold on.
Oh, hold on,
guys.
George. George, you're in the wrong section. Hold on.
Yeah, George, can you move up one section?
I'll fix it, George. Hold on a sec. There we go. Now just move your cursor.
Okay. So we have some responses to the question that Niall just asked. Can you guys put your hands up if you've got things to say? No responses? All right, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that I think there might be one or two other places that we are creating an annotation. Actually, I guess For secrets, no, I believe we use an owner reference, right? Not an annotation.
Yeah, I was just suggesting that like we can review if there are any other places and look at them, whether we have a limit or something of the size.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. If anyone has anything else to say here, please put your hand up soon. Going once. All right, let's move on then. Doug, you want to talk about the rebase schedule post V1, post 1.8/R beta?
Well, actually, is Sunil on the call?
I was not able to get a hold of him.
Okay, 'cause I think that'd be more interesting than my conversation, but okay. Yeah, so this was added only because we were talking about it yesterday and I had an AI to add it. Basically, what I'd like to, I guess, do is have a discussion about post 1.8, or I guess post beta. How often do we want to rebase? Do we want to track the Kubernetes releases going forward? And just to sort of focus the discussion, I put out a proposal for people to throw darts at. Once we go beta, I propose that we try to make sure that we align with the Kubernetes releases. We could do it more often if we want, but at a minimum, we try to release on time with the Kubernetes releases. And when we do so, we rebase on top of that Kubernetes release that's being released.
Okay, Paul, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
So I was thinking about this last night, and I think this is a problem that we are, like, we're probably the first to experience this particular problem. I expect that a lot of others will. And so I think that before we think of this as something that we can solve for ourselves, I think there's an opportunity to pursue a line of inquiry in SIG architecture about, like, what kind of guidance in general should we have for incubators and extensions to Kubernetes that use the machinery, because there are going to be a bunch of them. I wonder if Doug, if you're open to seeking some guidance on this in the SIG architecture office hours or in an email thread. This seems like an area where we're likely to be one of many experiencing the problem. And I've been thinking a lot recently about how can we help everybody at the same time as we solve these things for ourselves. What do you think?
I'm a little confused. So I mean, I have no problem starting a thread or discussion someplace. That's no big deal. But I'm not quite sure what I would be asking about, because my gut reaction is that it's sort of up to each incubator project to decide whether they're in a position to rebase often or not. So I would think it'd almost be like a per project's decision to be made in-house. I wouldn't want to necessarily have a global decision kind of thing made. So I'm not quite sure what I would be asking. So
I think the general problem statement is, should there be, should we establish an expectation in the community that extensions like this will rebase on a particular schedule, or is it up to every project? And if we decide at like the SIG architecture level that there should be a uniform thing that people try to do, what should that thing be? So I could see an argument that there should be some guidance that we give to extensions like this, because I think that it might be very confusing to users and the community in general if we have like 10 extensions and 3 of them always rebase on the machinery as soon as it's released, and 3 of them always rebase on the machinery a release behind, and 4 of them just do whatever they want at any given time. It will probably be confusing. That would be the argument, I think, for having some guidance in the community. But I think that would be my formulation of the generic problem statement.
Okay, so did I
Okay.
kind of summarize it in the notes under the possible discussion bullet?
Yeah.
Okay, I can take that action item then.
Awesome.
Okay, we've got Niall next in the speaker queue. Go ahead, Niall.
Yeah, my suggestion was just if we want to rebase as soon as the new release is out, we should probably have whether a branch onto master all the time or have a PR started 1-2 weeks before the release is out, so that we can review, we can fix all the issues, and as soon as the release is out, it's basically just change the hash commit, and that's it. Should be that easy.
All right. Morgan, you're up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, this sounds like one of those Walter Taco integration items though, where we need to, upstream. The only thing that we use mainly is the API machinery stuff, and that's the main thing that we need to keep up to schedule. So we need API machinery to have an opinion on when they're going to cut their release essentially ahead of time. They need to be ready a week in advance or something. And I think that's probably possible, but we need API machinery on board to have something for everybody to build on consistently.
Okay, cool. George, you're up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you also might be one of the first tools to ask about this issue at all. So if anything, you're kind of helping SIG Arch to kind of
what else is
be the
new?
facilitator of communication in between SIGs, right? If it's like, hey, how's everybody else going to rebase, even if it seems like such a simple, you know what I mean?
Yep. No, we're the first to do just about everything, it sounds like. So keep
Cool.
with
All
the
right.
tradition.
Doug, you are in the queue as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess this question is more for Kibbles. I think you probably understand the infrastructure of our build stuff a lot better than most of us here. So I'm asking you, how difficult do you think it would be to set up a Travis kind of job that would rebuild our stuff on a regular basis on Kubernetes master infrastructure? Michael, you still there? Oh, we did that on mic. Okay. You can just answer in the chat then. Okay. Because that might be something that we might want to do just as a side thing, say, set up a cron job kind of thing. So once a night, it does a build basing on kube master, and we can just see how that goes. We don't necessarily have to send out notifications yet, just see if we can get the infrastructure going. But then we can get to the point where actually if it is passing on a regular basis, then we can turn on notifications so we're notified when it fails, and we can look at it and say, have someone take a quick look, see whether this is something we need to address, or maybe the API machinery group didn't realize they broke us. I'm sure they would appreciate early feedback if it wasn't not an intentional change. So it's something to look at.
Cool. All right, Vile, you got a hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious on sort of kind of, and my only concern is creating an automatic process that nobody does anything about it. So if we assume, for example, that new version of Kubernetes starts coming out and everything just continuously breaks and everything else, is somebody going to go ahead and do anything about it? Or are we just going to basically, waste resources and create errors and nobody does anything about it? I mean, I'm perfectly fine to go ahead and have something that ensures that once something is expected to work, it stays working. It seems like in this case, maybe the default mode of operation is that it starts broken, and until something does something about it, it gets into a working shape. And I'm just curious, like, if that really makes sense.
Okay. Paul, you're up next. Go ahead.
I wanted to mention for completeness, there's an issue which I don't have a link to handy, where the problem of making it easy to establish which versions of these dependencies work with one another is suggested to be solved by having a release branch or tag for each of them. That is the Kubernetes release. So you could put in the Glide YAML, for example, you could put API machinery 1.8.0, API server 1.8.0, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which I think would be pretty helpful, since it was pretty hard for us at Red Hat to figure that out during the first release, and I think Atlassian had some trouble with that too, or first rebase rather.
Cool. Doug, you're up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, so to Vilay's question, I'd like to get into a mindset where our ultimate goal is that we could rebase anytime we want, and I think Kubernetes would be benefited if it got into the mode where they're going to assume people are going to be vendoring their code and their APIs and stuff, and so they cannot break people even for one night on master. I think that's sort of the ultimate goal. So if we can take the arrows for that goal and help push them in that direction, I think that'd be goodness. And so, Vilay, to your specific thing, I'm okay with the model where we say we set up these cron jobs or whatever, and initially we're not going to be notified by it. If things fail, and we're going to try to fix it best we can. But then when we get to the point where things do pass on a regular basis, I think at that point, yes, I think we should take on the task of nagging the heck out of people to get them to fix it the minute they break something. And at some point, I think should be hopefully moved into the main Kubernetes repo as a process or set of test cases or something. But for right now, I think we should help out the bigger Kubernetes team and try to see if we can lay down a process that we may be able to follow later on.
Okay. Niall, go ahead.
My suggestion was that I don't think that automatic job can really work well. One of the reasons is that, for example, when API machinery or Kubernetes start preparing the next release, they cut the release branch and continue all the fixes inside this branch, and master is still there, and they can break things after they make a cut. So if we're still rebasing onto master, it doesn't help us to rebase onto the release. So we at least have to have multiple builds or multiple branches to keep track of the things. Yeah, just as Doug said, we can have master and cut release branch, or we can actually have, potentially, we can have our master being dependent on the master of the API machinery, for example. And once they cut the release, we do cut release as well, something like that. But then I guess our releases should be in sync with the releases of API machinery, which are like 3 months or so, major releases, and the rest is minor. I don't know.
Okay.
To us.
Vilay, go ahead.
Yeah, so two thoughts. One of them is, I think we already, my hesitation is we already have our plates full. Pulling up people to do work that for this one doesn't seem like kind of a biggest problem we should be solving right now, putting resources. Second point is this not something that might be tackled by SIG testing, or whatever that group is, SIG test, or basically Eric Feda from Google, and to see if they can do it. If the goal truly is to go and have something in the Kubernetes master branch that does this, then it seems like maybe we should approach them and saying, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Do you have any plans on this, or so forth? But I just know we are super busily trying to get the beta, and taking on extra work just seems sketch.
Cool. So I put my hand up. I want to take my hat off and share my subjective opinion. Yeah, as Doug said, this would be a post-beta 1 thing. I would still be against trying to boil the ocean and solve this for everybody. Let's figure out what works for us, and then we can suggest something upstream to either SIG architecture or SIG test collaboration. But we can bring this up as well. We could even bring it up now to SIGArch and say this is something we're struggling with. We're gonna bring it up again later, and we'll update people on our solution. But I really, even post beta, don't want to get in the habit of trying to solve this problem or other problems for everybody. That's it from me. Does anyone else have anything to say? I don't see any hands. Okay, so Sunil is not here, so we're not going to be able to get to the pod preset migration details point. I will move that to tomorrow, and hopefully he'll be able to make it tomorrow. We've got action items, so go back through this list. I think there's maybe 2, there's at least 1. So go back through this list, go over your action items, get those done. Otherwise, I don't see any other hands even now after my spiel. So we're going to get 11 minutes back on our day. Thank you, George, for taking notes, and thank you for everybody else for coming and putting your 2 cents in. Much appreciated and great discussion today. So, see you later,
Thanks
everybody.
a lot, George. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Sounds good.